I started my diet at the beginning of the summer. I always knew that I needed to lose some weight, but I didn't really do anything about it until my girlfriend Lucy confronted me. She said that I'd let myself go and she was no longer attracted to me. This came as a huge shock because Lucy and I had been together for just over 3 years and I'd never heard her complain about my weight before. I guess she'd been frustrated for a while, but she'd kept everything to herself until she couldn't anymore. Elisa did everything she could to help me out. She even created a diet and exercise plan. I didn't want to lose her, so I followed her plan to a T. It was easy at first, and I was dropping weight pretty fast. But after a month, I really started to struggle. I had no energy, and I was constantly hungry. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of my own growling stomach. I was starving. I snuck out of bed, careful not to wake Lucy up, and I went into the kitchen to look for snacks. Unfortunately, Lucy had already thrown away all the snacks in the house. Instead, our fridge was filled with pre-made meals. They were all labeled with days of the week, so if I ate anything, Lucy would know right away. There was only one thing I could do. I grabbed my wallet and I walked to the McDonald's restaurant a couple blocks away. It was open 24 hours. I knew I was breaking my diet big time, but I couldn't stop myself. I went straight to the restaurant and pigged out on 2 Big Macs and some fries. I ate it all so fast that my stomach hurt. In a way, this was the best meal of my life. My body needed the calories. But, on the other hand, I felt absolutely guilty for going behind Lucy's back. I promised myself that I would never do that again. I slowly walked back home, feeling completely stuffed. As I turned back onto our dark suburban street, I saw someone hiding in our neighbor's bushes. A little scared, I walked closer. I got a better look at the man in the bushes. He was an older guy with a bald head and a little gray goatee. I'd never seen this man before in my life. Well, the man was dragging something across the yard. It was wrapped in a plastic tarp, but I could tell from its shape that this was a dead body. The man was a murderer, and I'd just caught him hiding a body. I stood there frozen, too shocked to move. All I could do was stare as the man dragged the body into the back of his truck. He tossed it into the back and then drove off. Thankfully, he never saw me staring. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone and call the police, but then I realized that I didn't bring my phone with me, so I hurried back inside. Lucy was still sleeping peacefully in our bed. My phone sat on the end table right next to her. If I grabbed it, I knew that Lucy would wake up. And that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. Instead of reporting the murder, I got back into the bed and tried to forget about what I saw. I know it was my duty to report the crime, but if I did, well, then Lucy would know that I'd snuck out of the house and broken my diet. I couldn't let that happen. I spent the rest of the night lying in bed, waiting futilely for sleep to come. By the time our morning alarm went off, I hadn't slept a wink. As Lucy made my breakfast oatmeal, she could tell that I was upset and sleep-deprived. She asked me if everything was okay, and I lied right to her face. For the next few days, I felt so guilty. I had this big, horrible secret, and there was no one I could talk to. Eventually, I just convinced myself that nothing had happened. I'd imagined everything. And then Saturday rolled around, and a policeman appeared at our doorstep. He was an elderly bald man with thick glasses. He introduced himself as Officer Moretti, and said that he was looking into a missing persons case. He said that our neighbor, Jim, has been gone for the last 3 days. I didn't know Jim by name, but I assumed he was the dead body. And that's when I gave in and confessed everything. I gave Officer Moretti a description of the man. He asked me why I didn't come forward earlier, and I told him that I was ashamed for breaking my diet. Just as I finished confessing everything, I noticed a strange look on the policeman's face. He was weirdly angry. Then I realized that I'd seen this face before. This was the man I'd seen the other night, the man hiding the body. He didn't have a goatee anymore, but it was still the same guy. And now he knew that I saw him. He stepped closer, his face falling in shadow, and he whispered, "Try to watch out. You never know when someone like that might come back." And then he was gone. I went back inside, completely numb. Lucy was already in the living room when I re-entered. She saw the look on my face and asked me if everything was okay. I couldn't hide it anymore. I started to tell her everything, including how I broke my diet. Before I could get to the murder part, she stopped me. "I can't believe you cheated on your diet!" she shouted. "After all the work I've done?" I tried to tell her the rest of the story, but by that point she refused to listen. She was so focused on my McDonald's dinner. Eventually, she told me to leave. "Go get another Big Mac or two. I don't mind." I awkwardly left. Like she told me, I went back to McDonald's, but I was too upset to eat. I just sat there, thinking about how I could get my girlfriend to believe me. I was gone for less than an hour, but when I got back home, the front door was open and the house was empty. I couldn't find Lucy anywhere. I rushed outside, worried that the killer had come back, when I saw my neighbor Denise walking her dog. I ran over and asked if she'd seen my girlfriend. "Yeah, I did," she said. "She was talking to that nice policeman. I just saw them get in his truck." I drove straight to the police station after that. I told them about Officer Moretti, and the cop on duty gave me a very sad look. There's no one with that name in our department. I haven't seen Lucy ever since. My husband Tim and I always threw a 4th of July barbecue in our neighborhood. It was a tradition we'd done for nearly a decade, and it was always a highlight of our year. Tim was responsible for the food and fireworks, while I was in charge of pretty much everything else. This year's party was going to be the biggest we ever had. We ordered tons of food, and I invited all our neighbors. Mostly everybody RSVP'd yes, including our next-door neighbor, William. He'd moved into the community 2 years ago, but he'd never been over to our house. He was a friendly, very good-looking man, but he usually kept to himself. I was surprised that he'd agree to come. On the morning before the party, Tim came to me while I was decorating and asked about the guest list. I told him all the people who said yes, but when I mentioned William's name, he got a really weird look on his face. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" he asked. "Inviting William?" I asked. "Of course it is. It would be rude to invite everyone else except him." "Fine," he said angrily. Then he left to buy the fireworks. It was clear that he didn't want William to come to our party, but I had no idea why. I didn't think he'd had a single conversation with William, and the only time I'd ever talked to William for longer than a minute was back when I helped him move in 2 full years ago. Tim had no reason to dislike our neighbor. Tim returned about an hour later with tons of sparklers and other small-scale fireworks. I had finished setting up all the tables and decorations, so I asked if he needed help setting up the fireworks. "No," he shouted. "I can do this myself. I don't want you to hurt yourself." I thought that was a very strange thing to say. By noon, the first guests had arrived. Pretty soon, our backyard was filled with all our friends. Tim seemed to be in surprisingly high spirits, but I worried that his attitude would change once William showed up. I was wrong. When William arrived, Tim ran over and greeted him like they were long-lost brothers. I instantly relaxed, thinking that I'd misinterpreted his feelings completely. The party seemed to go off without a hitch. With country music blaring from our speakers, Tim served up his burgers and hot dogs, and I sat with the guests. I ended up sitting next to William, and I finally got to learn more about him. He was a fireman for the county, divorced and single. He spent his free time racing hot rods. Overall, he seemed like a really interesting person, despite being somewhat introverted. When we were done eating, Tim gathered everyone to the center of the yard and handed out sparklers and little cherry bombs for us to light. You can't have a 4th of July barbecue without some fireworks, but we always went for the smaller, safer ones. The yard was filled with smoke and lights as we each lit up our tiny fireworks. It was a beautiful moment. William seemed especially excited to participate. Once all the sparklers died down, Tim brought out the next set of fireworks. These were a bit stronger, the kind that you lit on the ground and then had to back away from before they exploded. He'd never gotten this kind before, but I trusted him. He wouldn't buy anything that was too powerful. One by one, Tim passed out the new fireworks to everyone at the party. William was the last guest to take one. I was too far away to hear what Tim told him as he handed it over, but I noticed that William's expression turned a little suspicious when he took it. I didn't know why. Once everyone was ready, Tim climbed up onto a bench and explained the rules. Everyone needed to light their fireworks on the ground and then step back at least 3 feet. He seemed to take the safety rules very seriously. Then he started to count down so that we could all set off our fireworks at the same time. As he was counting down, William walked up to me. "You didn't get one," he said. He was right. Tim and I didn't have fireworks of our own. Then William handed me his. "Take mine. I'm a fireman, remember? I see this stuff all the time." "Sure," I said, and I took the firework box and lighter from his hands. By then, the countdown ended, and I lit mine just like everybody else. What happened next was a total blur. Just as I lit my fuse, Tim jumped off the bench and dove toward me. He grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me back, just as the fireworks exploded. All the other fireworks did exactly what they were supposed to do. They shot streaks of light into the air. It was really beautiful. But my firework didn't work like that. Instead, it exploded like a bomb. It was the loudest noise I'd ever heard. If Tim hadn't pulled me back, I would have died. Smoke was everywhere, and my ears were ringing terribly. I looked down at Tim, who had gotten between me and the explosion. He was lying on the ground, burnt. I couldn't tell how hurt he was, but it seemed pretty bad. He was also unconscious. Thankfully, someone called 911 right away. An ambulance came and lifted Tim onto a stretcher. As they were taking him away, William walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. "I think your husband was trying to kill me," he said. "What?" I shouted. William explained that he'd seen firework-related accidents before. As a fireman, he could tell when explosives had been tampered with, and he knew that Tim had stuffed his firework box with extra gunpowder. Rather than call him out on it, he gave the explosive to me. "Why?" I asked. "Because I thought you were in on it too," he said. "I guess not." Confused and shell-shocked, I got into the ambulance with Tim and rode to the hospital. I ended up sitting in the hospital waiting room for an hour before a doctor told me that Tim had regained consciousness. I went to his room, where his face was covered in bandages. His arms were bandaged up to the wrists. Both of his hands had been torn off in the explosion. He looked up at me when I entered. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said. Very slowly, he explained that he had suspected me and William of having an affair, all because he saw me leave his house after I'd helped him move in. I never thought that Tim was a jealous person, and he'd never mentioned his suspicions to me before, but I guess the anger had eaten up at him until he hatched his plan to strike back at our neighbor. I calmly told him that William and I were not having an affair, and if he'd actually gotten to know our neighbor, he would have realized that William was a fireman who'd recognize a tampered firework when he saw one. My husband is still in the hospital, going through physical therapy and learning to use his new prosthetic hooks. If I were a stronger person, I'd be helping him recover. But knowing that he'd done this to himself, that he'd actually tried to murder someone, I've decided to file for divorce. I haven't talked to William since the party, but I figured it was best if I just kept my distance.
This happened a few years back. I had just gotten my first job at Dunkin' Donuts, and I really wanted to impress my bosses. I was by far the hardest worker there, always on call for the morning rush, and I quickly got to know all our regulars by name. Most of them were extremely nice, and a few were excellent tippers. But I had one customer who really stood out. His name was Steve, and he worked at an IT company just down the street. He came in every Friday morning to get donuts for his office. Steve was usually polite, but he always seemed so stressed out. When I tried to ask him about work, he literally got shaky. I guess he was a new hire, and his bosses kept loading more responsibilities on his plate. I could definitely sympathize, even though my job at Dunkin' was much less stressful than his. I felt sorry for him. Then one Friday, I sold Steve his donuts and then went outside for a smoke break. I stood near the dumpsters because I didn't want any customers to see. That's when I noticed that Steve was still in his car. He sat in the driver's seat talking to himself. It looked like he was psyching himself up before another difficult workday. This was obviously a private moment, so I didn't want to look. But just as I was turning away, I saw Steve pull out a can of something from his glove compartment. Then he opened the box I just sold him and sprinkled something onto the donuts. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then he drove off. I heard a loud clink as he left. A little confused, I walked over to where his car was parked and I saw the can rolling on the asphalt. Steve must have thrown it out the window as he drove off. I got close enough to read the label. It was rat poison, and he just sprinkled it all over his coworkers' donuts. He was going to kill them all. With shaky fingers, I pulled out my phone and called 911. It rang and rang, but no one answered. Wasn't there supposed to be a dispatcher on call at all times? I couldn't wait any longer, so I shoved my phone back into my pocket and started running down the street. I knew exactly where Steve worked, and it was only 2 blocks away. I ran faster than I ever had before, and pretty soon I'd reached Steve's building. I was panting and soaked with sweat. Through the window, I could see the box of poisoned donuts sitting on a table. It was already open, but none of the donuts were missing yet. Thank God. I pushed my way into the building and was immediately stopped by the front guard. His badge said Patrick. He was massive with both muscle and fat. I obviously couldn't shove my way past him. "Why are you here?" he demanded. I told him everything about Kevin and the poisoned donuts. His expression instantly changed. "We have to get those donuts right now. Come with me." He grabbed my arm and escorted me through the turnstile and into the main office. We hurried past cubicles, not saying a word. Eventually, he opened the door to a conference room and charged inside. I was right behind. That's when I realized that he hadn't taken me to the donuts at all. He'd led me in the exact opposite direction. I couldn't do anything though, because he closed the door behind him and blocked my exit with his massive body. "Steve and I had a plan," he explained. "We're not going to let you stop us." "But everyone's going to die!" Just then the door opened again. I felt relief wash over me, expecting to see another worker who could run and get help. But then my hopes faded as I realized that Steve had just entered. He glared at me and then turned toward his partner. "I think it's time for a change of plans. Forget the receptionist. We can pin the murders on this idiot, a nameless little minimum wager who just flipped for no reason." "You can't do that!" I screamed. "I'll tell everyone. I'll make them believe me." "Then I guess we'll have to shut you up first." He pulled out a donut that he'd been hiding behind his back and slowly stepped toward me. Before I knew it, he'd lunged forward, shoving the donut into my closed mouth. He squeezed my nose, forcing me to open my mouth, and when I did, he shoved in the whole donut and forced my jaw to chew. My mouth was filled with poison, but I refused to swallow. If I could just hold off long enough. Suddenly, the door flung open and a policeman ran in. He pulled Steve away from me and I spat everything onto the carpet. Steve and his accomplice didn't put much up of a fight, so the cop cuffed them both and left. He came back in a few minutes later to thank me for the quick thinking. If I hadn't kept my phone call running, they wouldn't have heard the full confession. I reached into my pocket and sure enough, my phone was still connected to 911. I said, "Thank you," to whoever was listening and ended the call. The policeman guided me out of the conference room. As we made it through the main office, he angled his body to block my view. There was something he didn't want me to see. Of course, I looked anyway and saw 2 office workers lying dead on the ground. I guess they'd eaten the donuts before help could arrive. I'd saved a lot of people that day, but I couldn't save those 2.
I felt my heartbeat thrumming in my ears as I looked at the red and blue lights flashing through the lobby windows. Sweat dripped down my back, mixing with the cold shivers that racked my body. I leaned against the bathroom sink, staring at my reflection. My face was ashen, my eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. I had just finished throwing up, my body convulsing with every retch. It was like my body knew something terrible was about to happen. I took a deep breath, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. I needed to get home. I needed the safety of my apartment, the comfort of my mother. I pushed open the bathroom door, stepping into the lobby. The lights were brighter now, the sirens louder. I squinted, trying to make sense of the chaos outside. And then a rough hand grabbed my arm, yanking me backward. "Get on the ground!" a voice shouted. I barely had time to react before I was shoved to the floor, my cheek pressing against the cold tiles. My arms were wrenched behind my back, handcuffs biting into my wrists. Panic surged through me, my stomach churning again. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. What was happening? "Please!" I gasped. I live here. I didn't do anything." The officer's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. "Who are you?" he demanded. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "I'm Clara. I live here with my mom. I just got home." My voice trembled, tears stinging my eyes. "Did you let anyone in?" he asked. I shook my head, my mind racing. "No, I didn't. I was in the bathroom. I felt sick." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We're going to check this out. Come with me." I followed him, my legs shaky. The lobby was filled with police officers and detectives, their faces grim. I noticed the apartment door next to ours was wide open, more officers inside. The air was thick with tension and the metallic scent of blood. My stomach turned again, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What's going on?" I whispered. The officer glanced at me. A woman was attacked in her apartment. Her boyfriend. Brutal assault. He got away, but we're looking for him. My blood ran cold. I remembered the elevator, the sick feeling that had driven me to the bathroom. If I hadn't been sick, I might have been in that elevator with him. I might have been his next victim. They let me go once they verified my story, but the fear didn't leave me. I couldn't shake the image of the beaten woman. Couldn't stop wondering what might have happened if our paths had crossed. Every time I stepped into the lobby, I felt a wave of nausea, my mind replaying that night over and over again. I couldn't escape it. My mother tried to comfort me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "You need to talk to someone, Clara," she said gently one evening. "You can't keep this bottled up inside." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to open up. The fear was too raw, too real. I started carrying a small knife with me, the weight of it in my pocket a small comfort. I practiced using it, imagining the attacker's face, channeling my anger into each thrust and slash. It was the only thing that made me feel safe, even if just a little. One night, as I was lying in bed, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words, "You were lucky that night." I sat up, my hands shaking. Who was this? How did they know? My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding. I texted back, my fingers trembling, "Who is this?" The response was immediate. "You should be more careful. Not everyone is as lucky as you." Panic surged through me. I called the police, but they couldn't trace the number. It was a burner phone, they said. I felt trapped, like a rabbit in a snare, my fear wrapping tighter around me with each passing day. I started to notice things. A shadow lingering in the hallway, the feeling of being watched. My paranoia grew, feeding my anxiety. I couldn't trust anyone, couldn't let my guard down. Every stranger was a potential threat, every sound in the night a harbinger of danger. Then, one evening, as I was walking home, I saw him, the boyfriend. He was standing across the street, watching me. Our eyes met, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. He started walking towards me, and I bolted, running as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment, the door locked and bolted behind me. I called the police again, but they couldn't find him. I felt like I was losing my mind, the fear consuming me. I didn't sleep that night, my knife clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't let him get to me. I wouldn't let him. Days passed without incident, but the tension never left. Every time I stepped outside, I felt his eyes on me. Every night, I dreamed of his hands around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. I was living in a nightmare, and there was no escape. One evening, as I was coming home, I saw a figure in the shadows. My heart raced, but this time, I was ready. I pulled out my knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. The figure stepped forward, and I lunged, my fear turning to rage. But as the blade connected, I realized my mistake. It wasn't him. It was one of the officers who had come to check on me. He fell to the ground, clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. I dropped the knife, my hands shaking. "Oh my God," I whispered. I'm so sorry. I thought you were him." The officer's face was pale, his eyes filled with pain. "It's okay," he gasped. "Just get help." They took me in, but I wasn't charged. It was self-defense, they said.
Who would have thought bad breath could kill a man? I mused this grimly, staring at the antiseptic glare of my bathroom mirror. Years of dental hygiene rituals, brushing, flossing, tongue scraping, all had been in vain. The sour odor persisted like a dark shadow haunting my interactions, poisoning my confidence. My now ex-girlfriend had been the latest to confirm my suspicions, sending me spiraling into a desperate quest for answers. Her words still stung, but they spurred me into action. I had always been meticulous about my oral hygiene. I saw my dentist religiously, brushed 3 times a day, flossed after every meal, and scrubbed my tongue till it bled. Yet the persistent white coating on my tongue never disappeared. My dentist had been baffled, offering no solution beyond more rigorous cleaning. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an obscure medical article online that I found a possible explanation: oral candiditis, a fungal infection that could cause chronic bad breath. Armed with this knowledge, I made an appointment with my doctor. Dr. Stevenson confirmed my self-diagnosis with a casual ease that made me question my years of suffering. "A week on these antifungal meds and you'll be as good as new," he said, scribbling on his prescription pad. His nonchalance infuriated me. How could something so debilitating be so easily dismissed? As I left the doctor's office, a sense of relief mingled with a simmering anger. Years of social anxiety, failed relationships, and shattered self-esteem, all because of a simple fungal infection. I started the medication that evening, vowing to reclaim my life. The next few days were surreal. The white coating on my tongue began to fade, and the rancid taste in my mouth dulled. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful. But it wasn't just my breath that changed. Strange things started happening around me. I woke up one night to a whispering sound. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the remnants of a dream. But then I heard it again, a soft, unintelligible murmur emanating from the bathroom. I crept out of the bed and pushed open the door. The mirror was fogged up, and written in the condensation were the words, "Help me." I blinked, convinced I was still dreaming. I wiped the mirror clean and went back to bed, dismissing the incident as a figment of my exhausted mind. But the whispers continued over the next few nights, always coming from the bathroom, always at the same time. Unable to ignore it any longer, I set up a voice recorder before going to bed. The next morning, I played back the tape. Amidst the ambient noise, I heard it clearly, a faint, desperate voice whispering, "Help me." I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone or something was in my apartment. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my bathroom mirror was haunted? I needed proof. That night, I set up a video camera. I didn't sleep, keeping one eye on the bathroom door. Around 3 a.m., the whispering started. I tiptoed to the bathroom, heart pounding, and flung open the door. The mirror was fogged up again, the words "help me" scrawled across it. But this time, there was something else. A face, faintly reflected in the glass, staring back at me. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug. The face was gone, but the message remained. I grabbed my phone and took a picture, my hand shaking. I needed to know what was happening. I spent the next day researching hauntings, trying to find a logical explanation. Everything pointed to a classic case of a restless spirit, but I wasn't ready to accept that. I decided to investigate the history of my apartment. At the local library, I uncovered a series of articles about a man named Henry Thompson who had lived in my apartment a decade ago. He was a recluse, rarely seen by neighbors. One day, a foul odor led the building superintendent to Henry's apartment, where he was found dead. The cause of death was ruled a suicide, but rumor suggested foul play. I returned home, determined to communicate with Henry. I set up my camera and sat in front of the mirror, speaking softly. "Henry, if you're here, I want to help you. What happened to you?" The whispers started again, more urgent this time. The mirror fogged up and a new message appeared. "Find the key." I searched the apartment, tearing through drawers and closets. In a dusty corner of the bedroom, I found a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a small, rusty key. I had no idea what it unlocked, but I was getting closer. That night, I set the key on the bathroom sink. "Henry, I found the key. What do I do with it?" The mirror fogged and a single word appeared. "Basement." I descended into the building's basement, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Among the old storage units, I found one with a padlock that matched the key. My heart raced as I turned the lock and opened the door. Inside was a small, dusty room filled with old furniture and boxes. In the corner, I found a stack of journals. They belonged to Henry, detailing his life and the events leading up to his death. He wrote about being tormented by a neighbor who wanted him out of the apartment. The final entry was a plea for help, dated the day before he died. I brought the journals to the police, who reopened the case. The neighbor was eventually arrested, and Henry's death was reclassified as a homicide. The restless spirit that had haunted my nights was finally at peace. The whispers stopped and my breath was fresh. With Henry's story told, I felt a sense of closure. My confidence returned and I began to rebuild my life, free from the shadow of bad breath and haunted mirrors. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one last time, smiling at my reflection. "Thank you, Henry," I whispered. "Rest in peace." As I walked away, I glanced back. The mirror was clear, and for the first time in years, so was my mind.
Living in a small town in Oregon, I always felt secure. It was the kind of place where nobody locked their cars or houses. Life was slow, safe, and predictable. Until the day my wallet disappeared. It had been sitting on my nightstand, and I tore my room apart looking for it. Nothing. I chalked it up to my absent-mindedness and tried to move on. Weeks later, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed a note in the bathroom, written in a cutesy font with little spirals around where the words were, "Mike says hello." At first, I didn't think much of it. One of my roommates, Sarah, always had friends over, so I figured it was just a playful note from one of them. I shrugged it off and went to bed. A week passed, and curiosity got the better of me. I asked Sarah if anyone knew someone named Mike. She looked at me puzzled and said, "No, I thought it was one of your friends. I don't know anyone named Mike." Her response sent a chill down my spine. If it wasn't a friend, then who had been in the house? 2 days later, around midnight, I stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. The air was crisp, and the street was empty, except for a shadowy figure standing across the road, staring straight at me. My heart started to race. I took a few steps forward and shouted, Hey, who are you?" The figure didn't respond, but instead turned around and walked away into darkness. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. On a hunch, I decided to check on the grill in the backyard. I rarely used it, but something told me to look inside. Lifting the lid, my jaw dropped. Sitting there, neatly in the center, was my wallet, completely untouched. I had used the grill since losing my wallet. How had it gotten there? From that day on, I started locking the doors, but the unease lingered. I kept replaying the events in my head. The missing wallet, the strange note, the staring figure, the reappearance of my wallet. It all felt connected. I decided to dig deeper. I began by asking around town for any unusual occurrences. It was then that I heard about Mike. He had been a resident of our town, a regular guy, until he vanished one day without a trace. The police had no leads, and his disappearance remained a mystery. The more I learned, the more it felt like that his disappearance and my experiences were connected. One night I was in the kitchen, and I heard a soft knock at the door. I peeked through the window and saw a middle-aged woman standing on the porch. Cautiously, I opened the door. "Are you Alex?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah, that's me. Who are you?" I replied, equally cautious. "My name is Karen. I'm Mike's sister. I think you might be in danger." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I invited her in and we sat down at the kitchen table. Karen explained that Mike had been investigating a series of strange events in town before he disappeared. He believed someone was watching him, and shortly before he vanished, he left a note for Karen saying, "If something happens to me, tell Alex." "But why me?" I asked. She claimed that she didn't know. She said that she found my address in his things and thinking that it might have been a warning for me. As Karen spoke, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Mike had been onto something, or someone, and now that person was targeting me. But why? I needed answers. Over the next few days, I started noticing things around the house. Small items were moved, doors left ajar, the feeling of being watched. I knew I had to confront whoever was behind this. I set up a camera in the living room, hoping to catch the intruder. One night, I was reviewing the footage. Then I saw it. A man, tall and thin, entered the house through the back door. He moved with a disturbing familiarity, as if he knew the layout of our home. He stopped in front of the camera, looked directly into it, and mouthed the words, "Mike says hello." I called the police, showing them the footage. They took the report seriously and started an investigation, but the intruder remained elusive. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. A deep voice on the other side said, "Meet me at the old factory outside of town if you want answers." The line went dead. I knew it was risky, but I had to go. I drove to the factory, my heart pounding. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. As I stepped deeper into the shadows, a figure emerged. "Who are you?" I demanded. The man stepped out of the light, revealing a scarred face. "My name is Sam. Mike was my partner. We were investigating a corrupt group of individuals in this town. They took Mike when he got too close. And now they're after you." "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. "They have connections everywhere. Trust no one," Sam warned. "Mike left clues for you. Find them, and you'll uncover the truth." With Sam's help, I began to piece together Mike's investigation. We discovered that the town's seemingly perfect facade hid a dark secret. A network of corruption involving prominent town members. The final clue led us to a hidden room in the basement of Town Hall. Inside, we found documents detaining illegal activities and evidence that linked back to the powerful individuals in town. We had enough to expose them. With the evidence in hand, we went to state authorities. The ensuing investigation led to arrests and a massive cleanup of the town's corrupt elements. In the aftermath, I reflected on how my safe, predictable life had been shattered, only to reveal the truth underneath the surface. Mike's disappearance had not been in vain. His determination had discovered a web of lies, and his clues led me to the truth. As I stood on my porch, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of closure. The town was safer now.
From where I stood, I could hear the music. The wind flutes blew in a rhythm akin to something very natural, something very different from what I knew. In my mind, it was not difficult to understand how they enjoyed the music. But I knew that they did because the chanting and the ululation never lost its vibrancy even as the hours progressed and the night further deepened itself. I found myself a few times trying to catch the tune. Middle Eastern music, I said to myself and shook my head. I would often taunt Paul, my friend, with some of the words that I had caught of the language that the guests spoke to me used. I did not know the meaning of it, and even if they lied to me, there was no way I could possibly tell. The language was poetic, rolling off the tongue without the impediments of too many consonants. The music was better. I was 25 at the time, and I had seen most things as a mature college student who worked part-time as a security guard at the local McDonald's on weekends. The money was not the best, but it was a decent way to earn extra cash. I did not have enough training in martial arts like most of my other colleagues, but we simply banked on the uniform that we had to keep everything around us and everybody safe. A few times, a guest had lost it in the McDonald's, and we had been called in to escort them out. They often always complied, sometimes with physical force, but none of them put up a resistance that was enough to test me. On the opposite end of the street was a Lebanese shop, which was famous for their kebab wraps. The owner was a middle-aged man, rarely ever smiled, and always had a perpetual haste to his stride. His face was wrinkled, and his eyes were sunken in its holes, which were surrounded by fatty rolls. Despite his demeanor, the shop was always packed. His staff provided the entertainment that the man did not have, with music, smiles, charisma, and good humor. The day that changed my life was the first day of summer since I had started my work as a security guard at McDonald's. The kebab store had been packed full of people, more of whom were having a drunken party as the music blasted loudly. The same music that sounded like an ancient call to a party. It was not unusual for this to happen, as the store had enough space for guests to dine in, while the McDonald's that I worked for did not. Patrons could only buy in takeaways. Now, I preferred my work at the McDonald's by a wide margin, as I didn't have to deal with the behavior of drunk people. But from where I stood, I enjoyed their excitement, which went on and on until a power cut ended it suddenly. The customers shouted in frustration so loudly that it echoed through the streets. Some of them were acting very excited and energetic. I wasn't sure, but it seemed like some of them were just pretending to be annoyed. They complained that the music had been their muse, and the owner had ruined the night. So they would go to the McDonald's opposite the street for some entertainment, as the McDonald's at least kept their lights on. I don't know why that made me nervous. Perhaps it was my gut informing me of trouble before it arrived. But anyway, I felt my fingers going numb from anxiety as I watched the crowd of people throng out of the kebab store, causing a nuisance as they staggered towards McDonald's. "You reckon we would be able to contain them, Chris?" Nick, my partner for the evening, asked. I shrugged, unwilling to betray my helplessness. I kept my expression as somber as I could as the guests walked past me to place their orders, until one of them stopped and stared at me. The chanting and loud merriment continued in a muffled noise as I held the man's gaze. His eyes glittered like polished glass, and I could tell he was drunk. But that wasn't the thing that stood out about him to me. He had a stare that made me feel uneasy. His eyes carried such strong malice that impacted me before I had even known his name. I tried to look away, but the man wouldn't move. My instincts warned me that he might cause trouble, but I tried to stay calm in front of him. "Pig," he said, retched, and spat froth at my boot. I was struck by his crudeness. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. You have no choice." I squinted to see the crowd of people barge past him as though he were not there, not saying these words, not looking at me with that horrifying glare in his eyes. I chugged on the spittle that lined my throat and coughed up. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," I replied to him. He gave off a long, serpentine hiss. "You do. You all do. You all confess to it when you have no choice," he said. And I could tell from his reaction that they were words that he would rather not say, but rather keep in his mind. But the drunken state he was in had stripped him of his inhibitions. Nick's attention was drawn to the unruly crowd in the McDonald's, while I remained outside with the drunk man, feeling that fear gnaw in my chest and eat up my heart. The man looked over his shoulder and grinned. He noted how pale I looked and shook his head. "I was right to feel such fear," he said. "He had made a vow to his brother as he held him in his hands one night when a cop had killed him that he would avenge his death on every cop that he could lay his hands on." "I have no idea what you're saying. I'm afraid you've got me mixed up for someone," I was replying, trying to douse the tension between us when he suddenly drew his knife. And it was as though I was staring down the gates of hell itself when he closed the distance between us in a drunken stride. His words were a jumbled mess of anger and sorrow, a mixture that made my pulse race. I glanced at Nick, who was busy trying to calm the crowd inside. My heart pounded as the man swayed closer, his knife catching the faint glow of the streetlights. I braced myself, unsure of what to do next. Just as he lifted the knife, his eyes rolled back and he stumbled. The man's legs gave out from under him and he crumbled to the ground, unconscious. The knife clattered harmlessly beside him. I let out a breath that I didn't realize I'd been holding. Nick rushed over, eyes wide with concern. "You all right, Chris?" "Yeah," I nodded, still shaking. "He just passed out." We exchanged a quick glance before deciding what to do. I knelt down and checked his pulse. He was breathing, just deeply unconscious. "We should call the police and an ambulance," I suggested. Nick agreed and pulled out his phone. As he made the call, I looked at the man on the ground. Despite his threatening demeanor, he was just another person with a story, carrying more pain than he could handle. I felt a mix of relief and pity. The police and paramedics arrived quickly, taking control of the situation. They loaded the man onto a stretcher, and I explained what had happened. The officers thanked us and assured us that they'd handle everything from there. As the night wore on, the chaos of the evening began to settle. The McDonald's returned to its usual hum of activity, and I found a moment to breathe. The experience left me shaken, but also more aware of the unseen struggles that people carry with them. I knew that night would stay with me, a reminder of how close we often come to the edge, and how a moment of human vulnerability can change everything. As I stood there, I glanced across the street at the now quiet Lebanese shop and felt a strange sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events.